Good Friday afternoon, everyone. It is May 31st, 2019. Bit of an interesting day, interesting week, interesting month. I think I posted a 60% gain this month, 6-0. I don't know that it's my best month ever, but, but I'll take it. Probably it's either my best or second best month ever, and this is what can happen if you make some bets with this system and you don't have central banks dropping sugar bombs all over it. But anyway, so on with the show? What do we have here? This is the Greedometer 13 sequence with this week now closed at 27.53. I think I did Tuesday or Wednesday. I did a note saying it would probably close the week in the mid 2700s if the model that I've got so far is pretty close. Anyhow, so greedometer sequence, that's what it looks like. Can't really tell a whole lot from what we got here. So let's look at the much more interesting mini greedometer sequence. So birth point, first top line point, first baseline point, and I should be playing some music and have some trumpets or something going, because this is the if this holds as the first baseline point, this will be the first mini greedometer baseline point that central banks will have allowed me/us to see in approaching 5 years. Yes, it's been a long way to get here. All the other sequences were subject to all of this sort of material happening whenever we got near a first baseline point. And by the way, I remind you folks that we were less than a week away from seeing a first baseline point in the previous sequence back in Christmas time, late December last year. And then, of course, that much reality was inconvenient, so someone chimed in and spiked the punch bowl. And, well, there you go. You guys can read it. Anyway, we're in Greedometer 13 / mini Greedometer 13 sequence as of that date. So birth point, top line, first baseline point. With that, we can begin to do some pretty decent forecasting on the SPICs as well as the U.S. economy. The future in terms of the SPICs would likely look something like this in terms of time and in value for the major inflection points. 18 or 1900, hang out there and then drop to 900-ish probably. Something in the 900s, how about that, right? In February, March next year. Now, this is the story. If no central bank sugar bombs, if there's no trade agreement with China, if rate cuts don't happen, then this is pretty much what our future looks like. In which case, the U.S. economy would likely enter recession September, September-ish, plus or minus a month. That's what things would look like. So this is a busy chart, and I mean to show or suggest that I anticipate and I expect the future to look something like what it has been for the last several years, which is to say that I do not expect this baseline to hold. I expect that central banks will, I expect there will be a China-U.S. trade agreement at some point in the next month, and that will necessarily warp the baseline from this pace to about that, a little shallower. Because why? Because something similar was seen when we had the Canada-U.S. Trade agreement and the Mexico-U.S. trade agreement. And all of those are about the same scale. I think Canada-U.S., there's about 5 to 10% more trade than with Mexico, and then China-U.S. is about 10-ish% more than Canada. So all the same kind of magnitude. So that kind of response should be anticipated with the China-U.S. trade agreement in the next month or so. We should also expect that at some point, in the next month or in the next 6 weeks or so, we're either going to get a China-U.S. trade agreement, that'll cause that warping, or we'll get the Fed announcing it's going to start planning to cut rate, to cut the FOMC, the Fed funds rate. So we'll get one sugar bomb in the next month and a half, and then probably 2-ish to 3 months after we'll get the other one. I don't know which one will happen, but we'll get one and the other. So warp from there to about there, and then another one from there to about there-ish, right? We're cutting with a bit of an axe right now, guys. And then maybe that's it. Maybe that's, maybe that's as far as it gets, but good chance there'll be more. Someone else, the Bank of China. Let's see, Bank of China hasn't impacted the baseline. ECB could though. European Central Bank could do something material to keep pace and back away from tightening and threaten another QE program and threaten God knows what. Probably, like I say, so something in the next month and a half or two, and then a couple months after that, and then a couple months after that, something like that. Where ultimately I do expect that we'll end up with a baseline about this-ish in steepness, and about that from a top line and from an end of the story in terms of timing. And yes, the election November next year. So this is pretty much what I expect to happen. So you've got some endpoints, right? So if reality is allowed to happen and we have, God forbid, an actual market economy, then this is what our future looks like for the next. It's pretty awful. Assuming that the people pulling the strings and that have been pulling the strings for the last 20 years continue to do so, and that no one ever wants bad stuff to happen on their watch, they will do whatever they can to stop an inconvenient reality from happening, which will probably warp things slower and slower and slower, pushing the endpoint out in time and raising the endpoint of the SPIX bottom a little bit. Again, folks, we're cutting with an axe at this stage. Do you really care if I forecast a bottom to this crash in November, December next year? Do you really care whether it's 1,000 or 900 or 800? It's a lot lower than where we are now. Anyhow, what else can I say? It's also possible, let me point this out, it's also possible that, so right now, we don't know this is the first baseline point, okay? It kind of makes sense in terms of what this looks like and this looks like, and the previous sequences. Yeah, pretty good chance, okay? However, it's possible that there's one more week of dropping and to drop a little bit lower. So, we could see next week, you could see a little bit lower value, which would probably be high 2600s or so on the SPIX to 2700 on a weekly close basis, in which case that would steepen this a little bit more, so about like that, and that would pull this in a little bit more, so that it would end over there. So that's possible. It's possible. I don't think it will. I think that's a little less likely than this week being the first baseline point. And baseline point, just for a lot of you folks that are new, it corresponds with a inflection point for the SPIX, the S&P 500. So a baseline point is where the SPIX stops dropping and starts bouncing back up. Similarly, a top line point is where the SPIX is a point in time where the S&P 500 stops climbing and peaks and starts to drop again. Okay, so that's what these inflection points are. That's what they're suggesting. Plenty of videos on the website showing examples of this unfettered and beautiful reaction, and I'm quite happy. I'm a bit elated. This is the first time in an awful long time that central banks allowed reality to happen and allowed this system to work in a pretty much an unfettered basis. So I might just pour myself a beer. All right, well, it's Friday afternoon, I guess, / evening. You folks have a great weekend. Oh, I should probably point this out. Yeah, so it's reasonable to expect that some significant sugar bomb gets dropped in the next month and a half to two, and that by the time we get to be some point in July, that's a reasonable point in time, we push out to get a new all-time high, at least 2960, and definitely flirting with 3,000. Okay, so that's it's if we get, and we probably will, some significant sugar bomb. Probably either a trade deal or the Fed backing away from rate hikes and explicitly saying it'll begin cutting sometime soon. Okay, so that's pretty reasonable, and then I'll have to redo this based on that. Anyway, you folks have a great weekend. Oh, probably next week. One more thing. Probably next week I will implement the button on the website to create your own account for free, and then you'll have a login ID. You can log in and see the newsletters, including weekly updates on this. I don't plan on doing more blog postings. with the greedometers. That's going to be hidden behind the login, which of course, that'll be free. So there you go. All right, on with the weekend.